Strobe cameras illuminated every inch of the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles on a night that was supposed to be just another publicity shoot for the Pepsi generation. It was January 27th, 1984. The commercial would carry a 1983 timestamp to look fresh on TV, and roughly 3,000 fans paid with tickets distributed by the BBDO agency screamed as if it were a real concert. At the top of a stage replica staircase, Michael Jackson wore a brand new sequined jacket, covered in glitter, radiating a smile, with Billie Jean playing on a backing track that had been rewritten with the lyrics, "You're the Pepsi generation, you're doing it right." The plan was simple. He would descend the stairs while rows of fake sparks mimicked camera flashes. Just 6 seconds after the pyrotechnic trigger, something went wrong. Instead of exploding above his head, the column of magnesium powder tilted forward and ignited 3 inches of hair stiffened with hairspray. Michael kept dancing, unaware, until the smell of burning hair overpowered the sound. 2 technicians invaded the stage, extinguished the flames with their bare hands, and dragged the biggest star on the planet off stage. Half an hour later, news agencies were firing off alerts. Michael Jackson burned during commercial filming. Speculation spread faster than medical care. Was it sabotage, cost-cutting, manufactured publicity? The tape leaked days later, repeated in slow motion on talk shows while tabloids plastered headlines about the melting face of the King of Pop. The public never saw the burn unit photos or learned of the hush agreement hastily signed with Pepsi, much less realized that this accident would open a physical and psychological wound that would follow Michael until the end of his life and would feed in the eyes of the press the wacko jacko persona that still echoes today. What happened in those few seconds was more than a production mishap. It became the spark of a war between celebrity and media. By stepping into the Shrine, into Cedars-Sinai Hospital, and into newsrooms that transformed a brief fire into an eternal myth, we will understand why the story still lives on and how it redefined Michael Jackson's relationship with pain, with his public image, and with the mirror itself. This is the true narrative behind Michael versus the media, the 1983 Pepsi accident explained. The origin of the disaster traces back to the fattest check that advertising had ever issued up to that point. Thrilled by the explosion of Thriller, Pepsi withdrew $5 million, a record amount for a celebrity endorsement, in exchange for 2 national commercials and naming rights for a 40-city tour, the Victory Tour. The brand's lawyers demanded concert-scale fireworks to capture MJ magic. Michael, who had already seen curtains get scorched during earlier shows, hesitated. But Joseph Jackson, his father, and John Branca, the lawyer heading the financial machine, convinced him that pyrotechnics meant spectacle, and spectacle was something that not even Coca-Cola could buy. With the contract signed, creative directors, choreographers, Jackson brothers, and a battalion of extras began rehearsing at the Universal Studio, adjusting every step to the clock. The Shrine Auditorium received a wooden staircase lined with metal steps and 20 flash pots loaded with titanium powder. Quick, white explosions, supposedly safe. They rehearsed 5 times. In the first take, the flame came out timid. In the second, it gained height, and Michael asked for greater distance, a request that director Bob Giraldi denied due to schedule pressure. Third and fourth takes, sparks grazed the brothers' clothes. The crew corrected angles but decided to supercharge the powder load to shine better on camera. Before the 6th attempt, the hairstylist sprayed even more styling spray on the fiber hairpiece Michael wore to lengthen his curls. The lights went down, and the hired crowd began screaming. The instrumental track exploded from the speakers. Michael descended 2 steps, spun, made the traditional tiptoe stop. Then the flash pot on the step above fired half a second early, projecting fire directly onto the singer's nape. In fractions of a second, blue-orange flames rose to nearly a foot high. He still completed 2 more steps, without feeling the combustion, until the smell of charred keratin made him place his gloved hand to his scalp. Technician Randy Phillips lunged in a tackle, knocking the star to the ground while another assistant tried to use a fire extinguisher that jammed. The audience, believing it to be a special effect, screamed even louder. Only when the smoke cleared and the music stopped could you see the whitened patch of exposed skin on top of Michael's head. The ambulance arrived in 4 minutes. Inside, the singer kept repeating, "Don't let my fans see me," while out of reflex signing 2 autographs for the paramedics. At Cedars-Sinai Hospital, he was registered under the alias Mr. Johnson to throw reporters off the scent. The medical file indicated second-degree burns on the scalp and neck, with spots approaching third-degree severity. He received 100 milligrams of Demerol intravenously, and surgical cleaning of the blisters began. Inside the burn unit, plastic surgeon Stephen Hufflin shaved away the singed hair, removed necrotic tissue, and applied a temporary graft of pigskin, a common technique to protect exposed dermis. Michael barely blinked. He alternated between questions about scarring, "Will my hair grow back?" and profound silences, a sign of emotional shock. All hospital staff signed non-disclosure agreements, but it took only 24 hours for a nurse to sell clandestine Polaroids to the National Enquirer. The tabloid's headline, exaggerated to the point of near fiction, screamed, "Fire melts Michael's face." The sensationalism spread like a virus. Television stations fought to repeat every second of the fire in slow motion, and unqualified experts opined on supposed neurological damage. The morning after the photos leaked, Pepsi's lawyers arrived at the hospital with a bouquet of flowers and a pre-printed settlement agreement. There was no doubt of liability. The sparks were supposed to fire 60 centimeters from the artist's head, but the cannon had been mounted 10 centimeters below specifications. The negotiation was quick because both parties needed the show to go on. Michael depended on the sponsorship for the Victory Tour, and Pepsi could not risk looking like the villain. On February 14th, compensation was finalized. $1.5 million donated in Michael's name to create the Michael Jackson Burn Center within Cedars-Sinai. Mutual silence on responsibility, maintenance of the tour contract. Michael refused any personal sum, converting the entire amount to charity, a measure that seemed altruistic but also served as leverage for public relations. While he recovered, the media never rested. British newspapers coined the nickname Wacko Jacko, alleging that the singer slept in an oxygen chamber and bathed in Perrier to heal his skin. Legends that would later prove false, yet earned plenty of clicks. Programs like Nightline debated in an alarm-tinged tone whether Michael's fame was heading for collapse. The cycle was relentless. Each rumor generated viewership, and viewership incentivized new rumors. On the private front, physical pain brought another dangerous companion: opioid painkillers. Upon discharge on February 16th, Michael left with prescriptions for Percodan and Demerol ampules to be applied during consultations for future hair grafts. Elizabeth Taylor, friend and confidant, would recall years later, "That's when the problem with drugs began." Quincy Jones, in interviews, would say that during the recording of Bad, the singer would disappear for medical visits whose true nature no one understood. To try to regain narrative control, Michael's image team arranged an exclusive session with People magazine. Soft photographs, hair carefully combed over the bald patch, diffuse lighting, heroic caption, "Triumph over tragedy." The issue sold nearly 2 million copies. Months later, Michael appeared at the White House to receive an anti-drug award from President Reagan. He wore a fedora and an almost invisible bandage, yet intriguing enough to become a positive headline. For one brief moment, it seemed he had conquered the media fire. Summer 1984 arrived with the Victory Tour plastered with the blue and red Pepsi logo on every stage. By contract clause, fireworks were forbidden. Lasers replaced explosions. Still, every time strobe lights flashed, Michael instinctively shielded his head with his gloved hand. a gesture that roadies nicknamed the Fire Ghost. He began wearing military caps and denser wigs, pieces that became fashionable but also armor. In an attempt to cover a spot of alopecia the size of a coin, he underwent a scalp advancement surgery in 1985, a painful technique with limited success. When lenses began to notice subtle aesthetic transformations, theories about skin that whitens and a nose that disappears gained traction. Many overlook that much of his later cosmetic intervention was actually intended to hide the Pepsi scar. Every time Michael reappeared in the news, whether buying Neverland or accepting awards, broadcasters resurrected the Fire video, reinforcing the archetype of the eccentric and fragile pop star. Media studies describe the phenomenon as traumatic loop. Recycled images shape collective perception far beyond the original event. In parallel, the entertainment industry revised protocols. The SAG-AFTRA union began requiring certified pyrotechnic technicians, and insurance premiums for commercials tripled. Law schools included the case in civil liability courses, citing it as a watershed moment. The effects, however, were not merely institutional. The burn center bearing Michael's name served thousands of patients over the following decade. Culturally, the incident became recurring fodder for Saturday Night Live and raw material for parody music videos. Some historians see reflections of the trauma in the darker lyrics of Bad and Dangerous. Paranoia, pain, and distrust. Themes possibly born from the constant memory of a throbbing scalp. It is legitimate to speculate what would have occurred if the flashpot had not malfunctioned. Without chronic pain, perhaps Michael would not have developed painkiller dependency. Perhaps his relationship with the media would have been less conflicted. Perhaps the story would have ended differently in 2009. Quincy Jones even said, "If it weren't for that fire, who knows if we'd still have him here." On the other hand, the tragedy turbocharged the legend. In the weeks following the accident, Thriller sales jumped 30%. The contradiction is cruel. The very episode that nearly destroyed his career fed the global curiosity that kept it burning. When we revisit the 6-second clip, hair turning to ember dancing, continuing chaos erupting around, it is impossible not to see the invisible layer, the bandage hidden under hats, the syringes hidden in dressing rooms, the tabloids sharpening knives for the next cycle. The story of the Pepsi accident is not merely about a burning star. It is a study in how a single spark can ignite a narrative, and how the line between spectacle and tragedy in show business sometimes narrows to the distance of a single step. In the months following the accident, Michael Jackson faced a crossroads that would define not just his career but his entire relationship with fame itself. The burns healed, but the psychological damage lingered like a phantom limb. Every mirror became a test of courage. Every public appearance, a battlefield. The tabloids had already begun circling, sensing weakness, preparing for the kill. Joseph Jackson and the management team understood one thing clearly: silence would be mistaken for defeat. Michael had to reclaim the narrative, had to prove that fire could not extinguish the king of pop. What followed was one of the most calculated image rehabilitation campaigns in entertainment history. The first move came unexpectedly. Instead of hiding, Michael accepted an invitation to appear at the American Music Awards on January 16, 1984, barely 3 weeks after the Pepsi Inferno. He wore a military-style jacket, partially buttoned, with a fedora pulled low. Scarring was still visible on his neck, but he refused makeup that might conceal it entirely. The statement was clear: "I'm not ashamed, and neither should you be." When he took the stage to accept an award, the standing ovation lasted nearly 2 minutes. Cameras caught tears streaming down his face. The narrative began to shift from victim to survivor. Yet behind the scenes, the psychological toll manifested in ways the public could not see. Michael became increasingly reclusive between performances. He avoided mirrors, stopped attending social events, and developed rituals around his appearance that bordered on compulsive. Childhood friend Brett Barnes recalled decades later. After the fire, he became obsessed with perfection. Every hair had to be exactly right. It was like he was trying to erase what happened by controlling every detail. The irony was cruel. In attempting to prove his invulnerability, Michael was slowly fracturing beneath the surface. The Victory Tour, which kicked off in July 1984, became his stage for redemption. Over 55 cities and 116 shows, Michael performed with an intensity that seemed almost desperate. He danced longer, jumped higher, spun faster. Critics noted a new edge to his performances. Less joy, more aggression. Bad and Thriller were performed with a rawness that suggested something had fundamentally shifted. Fans who had followed him since the Jackson 5 days whispered to each other, "He's angry now. Something changed." They were right. The fire had burned away more than hair. It had scorched away the last remnants of the innocent performer and left behind something harder, more complex. Record sales during the Victory Tour broke expectations. Thriller, already the best-selling album in history, gained an additional $30 million in revenue as fans sought to reconnect with Michael's artistry in the wake of the accident. The narrative had transformed. He was no longer just a pop star. He was a phoenix rising from literal ashes. Media outlets that had salivated over the scandal now praised his courageous comeback. The same tabloids that invented Wacko Jacko suddenly lionized him as a hero. Michael understood the machine now. He had learned that in celebrity, tragedy could be weaponized as easily as talent. But the comeback was incomplete and perhaps impossible. Michael could control his performances, his image, his public statements, but he could not control his own body's betrayal. The pain from the burns, aggravated by constant dancing and touring, led to deeper reliance on prescription medications. What began as necessary pain management for post-surgery recovery evolved into a cycle that would torment him for decades. Doctors, eager to keep their most famous patient performing, wrote prescriptions without adequate oversight. Michael, desperate to maintain the facade of invincibility, never refused. The foundation for future addiction was being poured brick by brick during these very months of triumph. The Pepsi accident, in retrospect, marked the beginning of Michael Jackson's slow transformation from boy wonder into isolated superstar. The fire destroyed more than his hair. It burned away his ability to maintain the fiction that fame was anything other than a gilded prison. In the years that followed, through bad, dangerous history, his music would grow darker, more introspective, more haunted. The lyrics would speak of paranoia, of enemies closing in, of a man unable to escape his own legend. "They don't care about us. Leave me alone. Scream." These were not the songs of a man who had merely recovered from an accident. They were the cries of someone who had glimpsed the machinery behind the curtain and could never unsee it. Yet millions of fans saw only the comeback. They cheered as Michael danced, unaware that each movement required pharmaceutical support. They celebrated his resilience, not realizing that what they were witnessing was the beginning of a descent that would eventually claim him. The Pepsi accident was the moment when the line between Michael Jackson the performer and Michael Jackson the human being became irrevocably blurred. He chose performance over authenticity, image over truth. And in doing so, he won every battle but lost the war for his own soul. The fire that burned his hair on that January night in 1984 also lit a fuse that would smolder for 25 years, growing hotter and hotter until it finally consumed him entirely. The great irony of Michael's comeback narrative is that it succeeded perfectly and failed absolutely. He reclaimed his image, dominated the charts, influenced generations of artists, and solidified his legacy as the greatest entertainer of his era. Yet the price of that reclamation was paid in private moments. A man in a hotel room, unable to sleep without chemical assistance. A father who couldn't connect with his own children because he was trapped in the persona that millions demanded. An artist whose final years were spent searching for the peace that the fire had stolen. When we celebrate Michael Jackson's triumph over the Pepsi accident, we celebrate a victory that was hollow from the start. And perhaps that is the truest reflection of what celebrity demands. Not that you survive tragedy, but that you bury it so deep that even you forget it's there.